Yo, and welcome back to the Banter Boys podcast. My name is Sanji. With me is Ross. How you doing, boy?
I am doing very good, Sanji. Thank you. Excited about a third season in the Premier League for Nottingham Forest.
Just barely, eh?
Well, always just barely.
I mean, now that you've told the listeners who you're repping, I'll let you do a fan introduction really quickly. Tell us your name, where you're from, your Twitter handle, and a little bit about you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, Ross Taylor, my Twitter handle is RossTaylor79. I am a former Forest season ticket holder. I actually chose my university because of Forest back in the noughties. And I'm currently based in Texas after 10 years in the US, but get to see pretty much every minute of Forest from here. And just been all things Forest since mid to late 80s, and excited to tie that into fantasy football and Fantrax.
Yeah, excited to have you back on the pod, especially after your debut Fantrax season, Mr. Champion. How did you enjoy it? Tell us all about your experience.
Yeah, it was fabulous. I think I enjoyed it way more than my wife did because, she kept looking over my shoulder and sort of playing with your silly little men again. And it's quite the overhead, as you know, in terms of the maintenance of these leagues and these teams. But I really like the format. It was my first season with Fantrax. Thank you for including me in the Banter Bash leagues. And by hook or by crook, I got lucky, I think, in terms of just winning out the championship. And I was also able to employ some of my kind of NFL kind of draft strategies to the Fantrax format, and it kind of bared some good fruit for me. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, our pleasure. You took the league by storm, especially for someone trying out the format for the first time. I know it's a lot to kind of get your head around. Maybe the first couple of weeks, all these UI buttons all over the place, all these different scoring formats. They've even upgraded the scoring system this season as well, right? To kind of benefit defenders and stuff. I don't know if you've had a look at it yet. But other than gaining promotion in the Banter Boys League, now you're in the top division. Are you playing in any other community leagues, or are you just trying to defend another title at this point?
Well, I think there was another league that you looped me into, so I'm certainly open to doing more. I think this is one of those things where you need to scale your kind of games because there's no point doing all the research and then searching it and only having 2 or 3 teams. Again, my wife might disagree with that. I think one of the tips there is just recognizing that it is only a game, and there were mornings where I think I was somewhat distracted from like my son's baseball practice and things like that because of how my streaming Senesi from Bournemouth was getting on. So I need to dial it back a little bit.
All right, listeners, welcome back to yet another Inside Trax series. Quick breakdown of the format of this episode. We have 3 main segments. The first one is general discussion. We're going to talk about impact of new manager or ownership, and obviously this is relevant given the late change to Forest season last season. Then we'll look at club's previous season's performance versus new season's expectations, old system versus new system. So talk about transfers as far back as last summer, the winter, and the current summer window as well. And then expected formation and starting 11 for the upcoming 24-25 season. Then obviously we're going to chat Fantrax. We're going to get a bit of draft advice with respect to Nottingham Forest from Ross. We'll find out his first pick, next 3 picks, at least 1 hidden gem, and a new segment we've added is a trap asset. And then finally, we'll round things off with advice from Ross. And you know what? Especially after his debut season, winning a league, I'm sure he's got a lot to add regarding, trading, spending fab, some of his best and worst moments as well. So let's get started. All right, Ross, talk to us. Impact of new manager, old manager. It was a bit of a strange one because I listened back to our first ever Inside Trax episode. And, you kind of hinted at, if things go wrong, Steve Cooper could get the sack. And there were so many, mumblings and rumors about it all, throughout of last season. And then, it finally happened. The chop happened. I think December 19th, he lost his job. Then you bring in Espirito Santo, December 20th. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. How do you feel as a Forest fan, seeing someone that was regarded so highly by the fans to disappear and now is kind of back in the league, but in a different dugout?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was definitely a bit of kind of left brain, right brain conflict on that because Steve Cooper done such an incredible job taking Forest from near the bottom of the league and, on a promotion run and then keep them up that first season. So there's so much love for Steve Cooper. I'm a total fanboy there. although that said, I am also worried that he's now at one of the rivals in Leicester, and so I have to temper that enthusiasm for sure. I think at the time Cooper he'd lost 5 out of 6 games, and as much as the fan base was absolutely loyal to him right to the end, as I say, probably the reality was right that it was timed to see a transition. And then Nuno Espírito Santo, whose name I've just butchered, came in. Yeah, we'll call him NES. He came in and took over, and there was a good uplift in early results. We won at Newcastle thanks to a Chris Wood hat-trick, and then beat Manchester United at home. But he also had a rough start, if you recall. I don't know if you ever saw the Bournemouth game, but Willy Bolly got sent off for basically a very, very clean tackle. And so he had some headwinds, and we have a chairman who's very, very proactive across all elements of the club, and that included hiring Mark Clattenburg as a consultant on the refereeing side, and we also had some contentious moments with some VAR decisions, and I personally would like Forest to be more attached to the results in the football this season versus some of that off-field stuff, which also includes PSR, which is something we can't ignore.
Yeah. Definitely, you guys were one of the more outspoken clubs last season, especially from a social media perspective. Some tweets that weren't expected. I mean, you guys had moments where I think the owner, fans found his badge or his pass somewhere in the bush or something like that.
Yes.
And then, it was crazy. But I mean, I get it in the sense that, listen, if somebody comes after your own, you go right back after them sort of thing, but not in the manner that I think people expected.
No, not at all. I think his badge was found somewhere near the Thames in Fulham after a 5-0 defeat, which was kind of the precursor to Cooper's departure. And then, I think he probably personally got hold of the Twitter account at one point to share his grievances. So, I don't know if that was fully representative of all the fans, but I also know that there were some pretty dog-awful decisions against Forest last season. I know we've all had our fair share, but as I mentioned, the Bolly one was one of many, and I think Ashley Young could have given us a hat-trick of penalties at Everton as well. So, hopefully we're in the kind of closer to the median, should we say, when it comes to that degree of misfortune.
Yeah, for sure. So other than the manager change, is there any other change in the hierarchy, maybe some coaching changes that you think might impact Fantrax assets for next season?
Yeah, so there's been a few changes, less so on the kind of coaching staff side, but I think more so on the sort of recruitment side. So the interesting thing about Forest and Mr. Marianakis, the chairman, is he kind of has a stable of clubs, including Olympiacos, who made the Conference League final, and another team, Rio Grande, I think it's called in Portugal. So he has brought someone in who I think is kind of overseeing transfer policy for all three, which does give a lot of flexibility to Forest to kind of loan players out, across that family, and maybe test some players, in other leagues, like we saw with Omar Richards. He was at Olympiacos last year, so I think hopefully that gives us a bit more potential to sort of balance the headwinds of PSR in the future, but also it just means that we can do a bit more structured kind of succession planning on some of the players that may be at risk to bigger clubs, or so-called bigger clubs. Morgan Gibbs-White's probably one of those, Murillo's another. So I feel confident about the hierarchy and the structure, and some of the initial transfers that we've seen thus far really kind of tick some of the key boxes we needed to address. So a lot of good change.
Yeah. So let's kind of touch on last season's performance. I think last time we recorded, you talked about the stress of possibly losing all your teeth in your mouth. Luckily for listeners, I'll let you know Ross still has all his teeth. But I'm, a little surprised given how squeaky bum it was towards the end of last season, securing promotion basically on the final day, or like the second to last game week of the season. I think you guys broke the record in terms of lowest points and surviving with that. So you guys ended on 32 points. And I think before that, the lowest tally was set by West Brom back in the 04-05 season with 34. Yeah, tell us about how your emotions must have been dragged all over the place last season.
Yeah, so I think when we spoke early last season, I think my kind of hope was Forest would be safe, maybe 4, 5, 6 games out, and it would be less tense. Technically, it ran to the last day, although I think we had a 10 goal difference advantage over Luton and 3 points.
Yeah.
So it was kind of technically maybe the day prior, the week prior, which was kind of similar to the prior season. Yes, 32 points was low relative to others, but this is now also a PSR age. So we had a 4-point deduction, which took that 36 to 32, and then the prior season we had 37 points. So it was a net decline season over season, and we were the wrong side of way too many 3-2 score lines. And as I mentioned, there was also a few, let's call them game-changing refereeing incidents that I think also we left a good 10 points on the table. I think I said the same thing last season when we spoke. there's always a good 10 or 15 points on the table for everyone, but it definitely felt that way for Forest.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we're obviously going to kind of evolve the expectation conversation as we go through this episode. But, just right off the bat, what are you expecting?
I'm certainly expecting an improvement. I foresee, maybe it's a bit of a hot take, but I predict Forest to finish above 3 of these 4 teams. So Bournemouth, Fulham, Brentford, and Wolves. So more in that sort of mid-table 12 to 14, 15 position. I think that's deemed to be a success. I just want us to be more into that sort of straddling into what a third-year Premier League team looks like. And if you look at some of the issues Forest had last season, we were woeful at defending set pieces, but our broader defensive stats were really strong. So I think we were kind of like in the upper quartile of teams when it comes to just in-play defending, but then when it came to set pieces, we're probably in the lower quartile. We've subsequently signed a 6'8" goalkeeper, a 6'5" centre half, which
is that Miguel.
So we have Miguel as a goalkeeper. So it's an unknown as to whether Matt Sells will start. And then we also have Milinkovic, who's a Serbian defender who played for Fiorentina in the Conference League final. So we've got a lot of starters. Certainly Milinkovic coming into the stable. Now, the other thing about last season, for the first half of the season, frankly, we were playing with. Oh, this is an awful thing to say, but we were playing with like half a goalkeeper some weeks. And I live in America, so I can't speak too ill of Matt Turner. But
oh, it's fine. He was shambolic. I'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. So the modern age of a goalkeeper is you have to be a footballer, as in you play with your feet. And whether it's mishitting it, shanking it into the stands, or just being tackled, if you haven't got a goalkeeper who can play with their feet, you've got a problem. And we didn't. So Clodemos subsequently has gone on to Newcastle as part of somewhat tied to the Elliot Anderson incoming, and then I think Matt Turner I more than likely suspect will move on. But again, there's probably 5 points, maybe 8 points that we lost last season just out of having subpar goalkeeping. And I really feel like we fixed some of that with Matt Sells and maybe even elevated it with Miguel.
Yeah. All right. I mean, now that we're touching on assets, let's look at, some of the ins and outs. So let's go back to last summer. I think we recorded pre-Brennan transfer. Now Brennan is no longer a Forest player. He's out at Spurs. And I know this is a Forest pod, but I do want to touch on his performance at Spurs debut season. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, good luck to Brennan. He was a certain star for us. And I think when we spoke about him, I said he was a good player to maybe draft in on the proviso that he may end up at another club. And that proved to be on the last day of the transfer window. And when we jumped to Murillo, maybe some of the same applies. But yeah, good luck to him. He had a good start to the season. I think his minutes will probably go up this season from Spurs' perspective. Maybe Kulusevski might move on. He'll bed in. He seems to be an Ange type player. So yeah, I think most Forest fans will wish him good luck. And then from a PSR perspective, being homegrown, it was net profit to the books. Yeah. So you kind of have to recognise that not all sales are equal. And when it's one like that, that balances the books. Player A in the PSR court cases, he brought so much goodness. And good luck to him.
Yeah, excellent. Let's talk about some of the ins now. First one, I mean, we talked about the goalkeeping situation of how unsettled it was, and Vlachodimos was part of that as well. What's his situation right now?
So, yeah, that I don't know. I don't want to speculate on numbers too much, but there seems to be a bit of horse trading, for want of a better term, going on. So,
Yeah.
you know what it was like at the end of June, and you're a Chelsea fan, right? There
Yeah,
was some.
unfortunately, I don't like telling people too
Yeah,
much.
let's call it what it is. There was some price paid at the end of June that was
Yeah,
probably above market value on a few
yeah,
players, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you know, I'll say no more than that. So I would say that we probably paid above market value to Newcastle for Elliot Anderson, and they probably paid over market value for Kodomos from
Yeah.
Forest. Hopefully, I don't get sued for saying that. But still, I think Lacodomos was a trial that didn't seem to work, and seemingly we've got some quote unquote good money out of it. So he's at Newcastle, you know, sort of limited Forest impact, but you know, now moving forward with Sells and Miguel, I feel pretty strong in defence. And you know, if you shore it up with a proven defender like Milinkovic, you know, here's my hot take. I think the Forest defence this season could be a fantasy cheat code.
Yeah, especially start of the season. Your fixtures are amazing to start the season. Like, even like, I know outside of fan tracks, like let's say FPL and stuff, I'm looking to throw in at least, one defender or a goalkeeper. I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, in terms of this, financial, let's say, quote unquote shadiness, I mean, I think it's really the fault of the entire system that's been put into place, right? People are just playing by the rules. The rules are somewhat flexible. I mean, we saw even with between Everton and Aston Villa, they had a couple of youth players that went back and forth. And I know people are like, okay, he's definitely not with that money. But I mean, if you're going to meet these PSR rules or standards or whatever, you just have to do what you have to do. And if it's not illegal, then what can people really say, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
anyways, let's talk about another name again. Nicholas Dominguez. I quite rated some of his performances, I think, throughout the season, but I think it was the lack of consistency that maybe didn't guarantee his starting spot in the 11 week in, week out. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, so I think sort of season over season, what I'd say is Forest probably have maybe 15 or 16 players that, you know, most fans would be quite comfortable as starters, whereby maybe last season it'll say 12 or 13.
Yeah.
I would put Dominguez potentially almost for his own misfortune just outside the starting 11 in the current crop. Now, that may be proven wrong, but I think game time is going to be a potential risk. And then similarly, a player in Elanga, he might have his minutes clipped back. So what on paper was a great season for him, he may fall out as a result of, you know, maybe Elliot Anderson coming in. So Forest are definitely one to watch when it comes to how does Nuno set up those first couple of weeks, because I think he'll be pretty loyal to, you know, that team. I think a lot of the chat out the camp at Forest pre-season has been about a hot start. They recognise that their fixture list is favourable, and it's, you know, it's against the types of teams where we've picked up a lot of points in the past.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, we're going to have to go hard and fast, and I think you'll be loyal to some of those players. But as a result, some of the names you might expect to get minutes might not, like an Alanga, for example.
I mean, there's one name that I'm hoping sees an uptick in minutes is Callum Hudson-Odoi. A bit of a mixed bag in terms of performances last season, not helped by injuries, of course. We saw him go from, let's say, being a 6-point player to like 9 to 10-point player on the NES. What are your expectations from him? Because he looked lights out towards the end of the season.
Yeah, he had a hot streak for sure, and I think that's compounded by Morgan Gibbs-White really seems to turn up in the second half of the season as well, maybe the last quarter. So I think they started to get some good rhythm. I mean, let's talk about Callum Hudson-Odoi from a Chelsea perspective. We signed him for what, 3 to 5 million, and he was previously kind of touted as a 50 million player for Bayern Munich. And you know, it was always about game time. It was always about confidence. Always about injuries. But he turned it on in those last kind of 10 games or so. I think the risk of regression for him might be a bit around if he's found out on his style of play. Like he obviously cuts in from the left and curls it far post, and you know, teams are going to start getting smart to that. So you know, that's his kind of default move. But man, does he do it well? And it's also really hard to stop. So if he stays fit, you know, I think his ankles may be a little frail. But if he can stay fit, then, you know, I'd hope that he would help us kick on for sure.
Yeah, definitely. There are a few players that were loaned into Forest. I'm just wondering, what is the status with regards to them? I'm looking at Nuno Tavares, Andre Santos, and Gonzalo Montiel.
Yeah, they've all been and gone. Montiel was a World Cup winner for Argentina, and Nico Williams kind of dislodged him towards the end of the season, so that was
Yeah.
someone we didn't sign. Tavares got some game time under Nuno. I think he kind of liked him, but he, as I understand it, is now maybe at Marseille, but it doesn't look like he'll be anywhere near Forest this season. And then Santos was interesting because he was kind of deemed to be one of the sort of Chelsea kind of wonder kids, and he didn't get any game time under Cooper, and then they subsequently turned him back from his loan. So, yeah, all three of those have been and gone, as including Divock Origi as well, who got some minutes but underwhelmed largely. And so now I think we haven't really tested the loan market as aggressively yet.
Okay. So, I mean, we touched on Matt Turner. We all kind of, I think, by now know where he kind of stands with respect to that 11, etc. Another player that we also mentioned, Anthony Elanga, you're talking about, risk for minutes, etc. Anything else you want to touch on Elanga? Like, because I don't know, it's harsh if he's not making that 11, because he was a big part of the reason why Chris Wood got that hat-trick versus Newcastle, right? In the NES era, or the start of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's got raw pace, and that's just terrifying, right? So he's always going to be an asset. I just think that, in modern football, you have, finishers who are, rather than substitutes. It's not like you make a starting 11, then you're a sub. You come on at 60 minutes and you can have a lot of impact. I think Elanga against quote unquote tired legs can be probably more devastating than as a starter. And maybe when Forest signed him, they were thinking they were going to use him that way, but he ended up having a lot more game time based on need. And then he turned up with some good stats, goals and assists. I think the other consideration for Elanga is the Cooper to NES shift. Forest have had a little bit more ball retention, and I think if Sangari is successful this season, then we should have more ball retention at large, and therefore some of the assets of Elanga in transition as a counter-attacking team were slightly less. So maybe it's when you're chasing the game and you're playing on the counter-attack, maybe against the teams that have the domination of the ball, that Elanga then becomes more effective. So that's why I see him to be a bit of a risk.
Okay. A couple more names to mention. Ole Einar, coming in from Torino. I thought he did quite well on his appearances. Was there a game that he scored a goal last season, I think? Was it Liverpool or something like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it was Aston Villa at home.
Oh, Villa. Yeah, you're right.
Toffolo cut it back and he met it on the edge and drilled it bottom corner, and I think we won 2-0 that day. He's really versatile. That he played both left and right side, so he's a good kind of deep league, certainly kind of deep roster pickup, because if we ever got injury to Williams, he often shift to right back, and then he has been primary left back as well. So he's good, and he put the afterburners on Kyle Walker against Man City as well. So he's express, and as a free transfer pickup, he was great. So I imagine he'll be a starter week 1.
Okay. And last name from this summer window, we have to obviously talk about Chris Wood coming in from Newcastle. I think season after season, he just performs. And I'm hoping maybe more of the same this season.
Yeah, I mean, he's lower mid-30s now. So I think it's one of those kind of like Willy Bolly, can you expect much more than, say, 20 games out of him? And Taiwo Wanya's had injury issues, but when he does play, he's really effective. So Wood might be in and out a little bit, but he pretty much saved Forest season last year, January, February time. But for Wood, we just kind of really struggled. So, he's a good one to have on board, but I don't know if he's going to be starter long term, and whether they may sign another one or Taiwo gets fit and ready. I don't know, but certainly thankful for his contributions.
All right, looking to the winter window, we talked about goalkeepers enough, I think. So Matt Sells, we all know where that's possibly going. There were a couple of names in here. One, obviously, I think most Americans are familiar with, but the Rodrigo Ribeiro loan, was that just a loan and nothing to expect from that moving forward?
Yeah, as I understand it, he went back as well. He was a young player. He got a few minutes. had some nice touches, but I think they just deemed maybe that's not one for us at this point in time. And but again, we've tested the different pockets of the world transfer windows, and got some good players in. Obviously, have to come to Murillo at some point, but yeah, this January window was more impactful for us in terms of rebalancing PSR, where Oral Mangala, who personally I was thinking was tracking to be in our player of the season in January, went on loan that then became a permanent deal to Lyon. So we lost Mangala. So anyone who's looking for Oral Mangala from the Forest side won't see him next season. The same applies to Nissimir Kate, who also ended up at Lyon through the June mini transfer window.
Yeah. Last name from that January window, Gio Reyna. Very popular amongst American fans, obviously. We know how talented he is. He came in from Borussia Dortmund, but he was also well known for being injured all the time. He had a couple of moments. It looked like he had great Fantrax point potential, but then just never seemed to break into that 11.
No, I don't really know what the background was there. I think it was difficult because fitting him and Morgan Gibbs-White in the same team may have been the challenge. Also, Morgan's pretty robust, so he played a lot of time. So he just didn't really get the minutes. He had some nice touches, but I think the club sort of deemed to pass on him. He is kind of last season's equivalent. I think Elliot Anderson's this season's quite equivalent in terms of if I were to say draft Morgan Gibbs-White, say early round 2, for example. Yeah. If I can pick up Anderson for good value, sort of mid-late rounds, he's kind of that handcuff, as they kind of call it in NFL fantasy teams. If Morgan's out, Anderson's probably going to slot into the 10, but he may even start himself as an 8. And I had Rayner on my bench as coverage for Morgan Gibbs-White for that reason, but didn't really need him.
Yeah. All right, let's look at the summer window that we're currently in. A lot of, released players, a lot of end of loans. I mean, we touched on many of them already. I think one of them I definitely want to highlight just because of how beautiful of a man he is, Felipe. What happened? Just the knees eventually gave out, and I guess he's pretty old, right?
Yeah, but he was a seasoned player that we needed. He brought some of the dark arts and housery to the team that we needed through that first season, and just game time was limited in the second half. But I think he was also pivotal to enabling some of the younger Brazilian players like Danilo and Murillo.
Yeah.
And so good record of service for Forest, but he subsequently retired and taken his handsome good looks with him.
All right, let's talk on the ins of this summer window. And I mean, if they're a youth player dynasty pick, we can just quickly move on them. Marko Stamenic came in from Red Star Belgrade.
Yeah, and then he subsequently has been loaned out. So with Forest, there's always a lot of churn. So he's one that may come back at some point in time, but not right now.
Okay, Eric Da Silva Moreira.
Yeah, he's had some game time in the preseason friendlies at right back. He's only 18, so it's a lot to risk as trust there. I can't see him dislodging Nico Williams, but maybe he'll have a good potential as a backup. But he's shown some good signs, for sure. Looks like a good signing.
Okay. We talked about Elliot Anderson already. Carlos Miguel, we touched on. How tall is he? 6'8"?
Yeah, 6'8". So hopefully
ridiculous.
people don't work out to shoot bottom corner, hopefully.
Nikola Milenkovic, I think, is the centre back that you mentioned earlier on the pod. Is he going to be like a sure starter for us then?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm excited about him. He played well for Serbia, did well against England. Played for Fiorentina, as I mentioned, in the Conference League. He's got pedigree, and I think we've got him in on good value as well as a club. So either in a 4 alongside Murillo, 2 centre backs, or as a 3 maybe with Bolly potentially. But I think those both Milinkovic and Murillo are the go-to starters, and he will bring a lot to Murillo's game that's lacking. I think he's going to win a lot of aerial ball. Murillo reads the game, he's quick on the ground, and I think that in theory they should be a really good complement to each other, which reinforces my belief that Forest's defence is going to go up an order of magnitude from a kind of Fantrax stats perspective.
Awesome. Final name, Shea Cahill. Anything to note?
Only that he's Tim Cahill's son.
Okay.
Yeah. So if he brings any goodness to us that Tim, like his dad did, then to the fantasy community, then great. But I think, again, he's probably one of the youngsters who's in the sort of B team arena versus
Okay.
being a real contender.
Awesome. Are there any other names that you want to touch on before we talk about expected formation starting 11?
So I want to talk about Murillo because I don't know if you've seen him. Check him out. He's an absolute Rolls Royce, and I feel like his future is way outside of Forest. Maybe it's Real Madrid or whoever. In 10 years' time, we could be talking about him in the same terms as Thiago Silva, as a legend of Brazilian defending, and he had shots from the halfway line. He dribbled the ball. He did all sorts. He's got great range of passing, and he could be the equivalent of Brendan Johnson this time last year. That if Forest sell him, and hopefully they don't, there's signs that they won't. That Forest could get 3 or 4 good weeks out of him and then sell him for good money. So you could get the benefit of Murillo showing up at a top 6 side. That's looking less likely, I think. Or him being part of a Forest defence that's very strong. The other consideration is Murillo was listed as a midfielder on Fantrax last year, and I imagine he's a defender now. So you're going to get upside on Murillo.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point to add. Okay, awesome. So then, looking forward to the 24-25 season, what would you say is the expected formation / starting 11?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we've kind of got 15 starters now, so it's a little tricky. It's not quite Pep Roulette, but it's definitely going to be one to watch. Similarly, we defaulted to sort of 4-2-3-1 last season, and a lot of the murmurings are Nuno might go back to his kind of more typical 3-4-3 that he had at Wolves.
Yeah.
So I kind of lean more towards the players that I think are kind of go-to starters and versus a full team. But one to watch is it Sells or Miguel in goal. You might be able to pick the alternative up pretty easy early rounds. Milinkovic and Murillo and Nico Williams as well. I think Williams, if he's in a 3-4-3, he's going to have more opportunity to play kind of like a winger. They would definitely be contenders. I'd probably avoid Yates, Sangari and Dominguez just as a kind of holding midfielder perspective. But if it frees up Danilo to kind of play more of an 8 than a 6, then Danilo could be another contender. Not quite as much as I was bullish on Danilo last season. Probably not as bullish as this season. But and then you've got the kind of attacking players like Cameron Hudson-Odoi and Morgan Gibbs-White, obviously. And I think Elliot Anderson could be one of those players that, if he can stay fit, can go under the radar as a... I think a lot of these Forest players could be where you're picking up late round streamer value and getting like round 3 goodness out of them this season. So that could be defining for your Fantrax season.
Okay, awesome. Shall we move on to the next segment then?
Let's do it.
All right, let's chat some Fantrax. All right, we're looking at first pick from Nottingham Forest. I think this is an obvious one.
Yeah, it's hard to look past Morgan Gibbs-White. I think he's going to step up again this season. I think I predicted last year that he was going to be on the edges of the England squad. I don't know if he's quite close enough to that, but his output, as I mentioned, the last sort of third of the season was really strong. The team plays through him, and I think he's just the go-to. He's also, as I mentioned, he's robust. He's kind of not only sometimes with these Fantrax decisions, it's like who's going to play frequently as a kind of talisman. So that's what makes him a kind of maybe even late first round pick, but probably more so sort of early second round. But I will certainly be stretching to have him again. I just like to have a player I can cheer for from Forest, and then similarly I'll probably go for a Forest goalkeeper because there's no better feeling than a clean sheet for your own team.
Yeah, definitely. I think last episode as well, when we recorded, you said it's hard to find someone like Morgan Gibbs-White that runs for 90 minutes 90% of the time.
Yes. And he does that. And I think Anderson has similar attributes in terms of the way that they're kind of like wingers that play as a midfielder, as a 10 or an 8. And they can break through the lines and they burst through. And so they got the dribble points and the key pass points. And I think he's part of Forest's future, hopefully.
Who do you think has pens then?
I think Morgan will keep pens, but he might lose some of the free kicks and he might lose some of the corners based on some preseason evidence. But that might mean he gets more activity around the edge of the box or in the box as they get delivered. So may not necessarily be a negative because, again, Forest's output when it came to set pieces last year, attacking-wise, was really poor. And then defensively, it was really poor too. So those are kind of 2 key areas we want to turn the corner on.
Okay, let's look at the next three picks and which rounds would you take them?
So I think Murillo would be certainly an early contender. As I mentioned previously, I think the upside is as a defender, and then the potential that he may go and do something else somewhere else. But he's also got a wonder goal in him at some point.
Yeah.
Similarly, Milinkovic. So one of probably Murillo, Milinkovic, and Williams would probably be a sort of consideration, and then sort of phasing into the sort of later rounds. Elliot Anderson as that kind of handcuff to Morgan Gibbs-White, if especially, and then probably Callum Hudson-Odoi. I think the rotation risk on your Taiwo and your Chris Wood is probably too high, but I'm obviously a fanboy when it comes to Murillo. I'm really excited for his future for Forest and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, with the players that you mentioned, I've only really seen Callum Hudson-Odoi go in mock drafts and no one else. So I'm wondering if like the likes of Murillo, Milinkovic can all be kind of picked up rounds 13 to 16.
More than likely, and as I say, as you mentioned, the fixtures are favourable for Forest those first 3 or 4 weeks. So, defensively, people might be blindsided by the fact that in theory the Forest defence should be materially better, and that's the hope.
Okay, let's talk about your hidden gem.
Yeah, it's kind of no surprise really. It's Murillo. As I say, he's just a Rolls Royce, and not to be too hyperbolic, but I followed Forest since the sort of late 80s, and I honestly think he's the best player to wear a Forest shirt since Roy Keane and Stan Collymore. So I feel fortunate to be in that period of time where we can say he was a Forest player, because in 10 years' time we might be looking back and thinking about a very illustrious career.
Okay, lovely. Now let's talk about a possible trap asset for Forest.
Yeah, sort of balancing out game time and injury is kind of sort of where I've been thinking on traps. And I mentioned Elanga. I think Elanga probably will be more of an impact player off the bench. It doesn't mean his output won't be good, but it's just, the minute risk is there. Similarly, Bolly, I think you can only expect 10, 20 games probably from Willy Bolly, and I think Andrew Omabamidele in the defence will go down the pecking order. He had some game time towards the end of last season and did well, but I think he's probably further down the rank, and so just watch for those. And then similarly from an injury perspective, Callum Hudson-Odoi always looks like he's hobbling, and then Taiwo often is hobbling, and Taiwo Awoniyi potentially could be a great asset if he can stay fit, but the risk is mainly around injury rather than ability.
Yeah, Ilanga's coming across as like a forward 4 asset, like depth for your roster.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I guess it's kind of a bit of a luxury play to have him if he is not a starter. I mean, I don't know about you, but typically I try and just index towards starting players in my team. So it's a bit of a risk to select someone who's on the bench, certainly in the early games of a game week, versus someone who you think is going to start on the Sunday or the Monday. So Elanga's just going to present a few headaches, I think.
Okay. Any other assets you want to mention, or are you expecting any big signings coming into Forest?
Well, I mean, Forest, as I say, you always expect signings. You always expect activity. So, we'll see. I think it's been more refined and targeted this time round, and it's been very much about elevating the starting 11. So maybe there'll be a little bit less churn than in the past. I think we need some depth at striker, as I mentioned, a little lacking there. Maybe even centre half, especially if Murillo is genuinely a transfer out risk. And Ibrahim Sangare is a player we don't really talk of from a Fantrax perspective, because last season he was a walking yellow card, but he did, rumours were he came back from AFCON with malaria, so that's going to be inhibitive of your form. And he was a big money signing last year, like 30 million pounds, but we haven't had that output yet. So if he can get the engine humming for the team at large, then I'm bullish about Forest, but I wouldn't consider him as a Fantrax player, even though he comes with some pedigree and a high price tag.
Okay. I mean, before we move on, I know we didn't mention Wood in this section at all, but, a lot of my thinking, start of the season, good fixtures, all in that. I saw Wood, scored in one of your preseason fixtures as well. With the doubt around Taiwo, him being a possible trap, would you say then Wood becomes a possible forward 2, forward 3, at least to start the season?
Yeah, that's probably where I'd put him. I'll temper my own Forest biases and probably say that I might look at other clubs for that position. But
Okay.
But yeah, it's one to track. I think in the last week or so, if Taiwo does get some game time, but probably no more than the third striker option for Wood.
Okay, lovely. I think now we can move on to our final segment, which is the advice segment, right? We're going to pick Ross's brain a bit as a Fantrax manager. So what can you tell us about trading draft picks? Have you given it a try? Is it something you'd ever consider?
Yeah, I passed it over last season, and maybe it was just this sort of relative infancy of our league, I'll probably sit back on that. I'm not so sure on the need, so I've not done it. I don't know if how you benefit from it, candidly. So I think my trade strategy at large is just one to try and get that good aggregate depth of regular players and not necessarily kind of premium, well-known top end teams, and just have that depth so that you have the flexibility to rotate, but also if you have any injury concerns. And last season I was really fortunate. Like my 15 was just pretty much always available, so the headaches I had was having to say goodbye to someone reliable to say stream someone in. But no, I haven't traded draft picks and I'm not planning on doing it, I don't think. I mean, tell me what the upside is, I guess.
I mean, I don't trade draft picks. I think I share the similar view with majority of maybe our fans, listeners, people we talk to in our community. It's way too much of a lottery and an unknown going into the draft, even to start with, right? So for you to trade away certain things, it's just like, I don't see the point. Like, how can you guess that future potential? Like, injuries happen, life happens. Like, I say just do the draft, see where it goes, and just kind of enjoy it. Like, why would you be wanting to, give away over 50% of your fab budget as well to start your season? Like, yeah, it's too much of a gamble. Like, unless you're getting, a top 4, top 5 asset, I still think the way some of the mocks are going as well, like late draft picks, you're able to get like, a decent pairing, like let's say an Anthony Gordon with an Isak, or, an Isak with a Morgan Gibbs White, that sort of way, right? So yeah, I think I'm of a similar sort of mindset where I've not tried it and I'm not looking to do that anytime soon.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, you made a good point about some of the sort of drafting strategy at large. Like I looked at trying to get those good pairs where you kind of get oftentimes instances where you get the assist and the goal because you've got two players in the same team. That's something that from a strategy perspective is worth thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Waiver claims, FA pickups, how do you usually go about them? Like, what's your strategy? Do you look at form? Do you look at fixtures? Do you consider both?
I think the first 3 or 4 weeks, it's about, where are the outliers, who's playing that you may not have expected. And I think Forest is going to be one of those teams where you could pick someone up week 2, week 1, and have them set for the whole season. And I got lucky last season. Someone dropped Anana in goal, and he was that perfect blend of kind of save points plus clean sheets. I think week 2 pickup. So being really proactive in that first 2 or 3 weeks on waivers, especially through the transfer window, because a lot can happen. And even just almost following some of the speculation and making some gambles on, okay, I can take Brennan Johnson last season. I drafted him under the proviso that he's going to get more impact at Spurs. So if there's big rumour mill stuff going around, then factor that into your kind of early weeks of waiver decisions too.
Okay, awesome. So looking back again at the Forest assets, what are some names that you would consider buying low or selling high, especially at the start of the season?
Yeah, I think the ones to watch from my perspective would be Elliot Anderson, because he's kind of a sort of underseen asset from didn't get much game time at Newcastle and had injuries. But I think for Forest he could be, if not in the starting 11, certainly player number 12. And similarly, Milinkovic has come in, and the value that he should bring to the gaps that we have, make for high potential there. You could pick someone up like that week 2 or week 3, who's getting good game time, and then, turn that into a kind of more predictable mid-round player on the cheap. So those are the sorts that I'm kind of looking at.
Yeah, I was also considering maybe if Wood started the first few games of the season, if you managed to roster him, I was thinking of selling high on him as well.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that would be a good example. Maybe even Alanga, if he is starting on the bench, but he pops up with an assist or something, you might be able to take the good numbers that are out there, and just convert it into something a bit more with a predictable floor.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Let's talk about some fab. Again, being your debut season, you got thrown into the deep end, learning how to use fab, because a lot of Fantrax people that we talk to also still don't play with fab, which is baffling to me. But what are your thoughts about fab? How do you usually kind of budget it out throughout your season?
Yeah, it's fun. I like that element to it for sure. There's some judgment to it. So, like last season, I was able to pick James Ward-Prowse up when he just arrived at West Ham. I think it was the first week or two. And I think it was $27. So
that's so cheap.
Well, exactly. So you're basically getting a round 2 pick for $27. And I'm like, yep, that'll do me. And that was somewhat defining to my season, because I was able to package him up with another, pickup in Dwight McNeil and Diaby. I put those 3 together and was able to get Haaland out of it for the last 5 or 6 games.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so that was kind of a somewhat lucrative deal. And I think the Haaland owner at the time had to do something to turn his season. Yeah. So it kind of felt like a fit for me and for him, but maybe the rest of the league was looking at it saying, like, how did you package that into Haaland? but yeah, so I think, again, I'm happy to overcommit my fab in the first 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 2/3 of it. But it's also good to have a little bit in the back pocket in case, making it up, Sadio Mane comes and joins in January to some team. You have to be you have to be ready to go on something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I would say the average spend on like hot transfers like a JWP that came in, people were dropping at least $100, right? That's basically your entire budget. And you make a good point. It's like, there could be big signings in the winter window. So, I mean, we're not saying to, again, save your entire 100, spend it then, but at least give yourself a bit of a fighting chance to get a popular name then.
Yes, and also it depends on your own squad needs. If you're playing week to week, you got injuries, like you got to do what you got to do. But exactly. I was fortunate that I had a high degree of predictability in my rosters through the whole season.
All right. Now, next, let's talk about some best and worst trades or, pickups or whatever. Let's talk about that last season, because you were definitely in a contentious one in the Bash League for some individuals.
Yeah, interesting one, that one. So in the Bash League, so thank you for including me in that. And I know there's a lot of seasoned players there, so there I was as a novice coming in. So I ended up being sold high on Emerson plus Rodri in January for Trent Alexander-Arnold. So I gave up Trent. And my rationale at the time was I was a bit nervous about the amount of volume of football we'd had in about 18 months. And I'd also lost 3 on the bounce, and I was just kind of just needed to mix something up. And I also think Rodri is just an absolute baller. And I know that's his position doesn't always lend well to Fantrax, but I also know that January, February time, Man City get hot. So, and oftentimes, whether it was Gundogan or anyone else, I felt that Rodri was going to outperform his stats. Now, in aggregate, I think it was probably an equal trade ultimately, because Trent subsequently got injured for about 4 weeks. But even on the even on the non-injured weeks, when you just head-to-head them, it kind of washed out. But with that, Emerson really was my water boy towards the end, because I kind of had to defend myself for that. So even though Emerson wasn't really performing, and he was such a boom bust player, right? Emerson would get you 30 points one week and then be -6 the next. And depending on which week you picked him. So he was very deep in my squad, but got very little game time. But I was so terrified to drop him because of the thrash that I was getting from the community for that initial trade. But ultimately, you got to just take your own judgment, and stats show you so much, but it's not an exact science, and that one proved out to be.
Yeah, exactly. I think even if you look at, like, let's say from January 1st or whatever, you compare both Rodri and Trent. I think Rodri ended up scoring nearly 250 points, Trent just under 100. So listen, you know what you were doing. People in the Discord were like, Russ, can you tell us which lottery numbers to get for next season?
Yeah. I was, there was a little bit of feedback that was like, hey, you've just basically like rigged the league in the favor of the guy who traded it, because this guy who was getting Trent also had Haaland, and he was top of the league.
Yeah.
Now, he was top of the league then. He finished ninth. He finished ninth.
There you
go. So, it's, again, you don't know, we don't know. And it was a bit lucky on my side for sure. But the learning for me was, and this is the Fantrax learning for your listeners, is if you have a premium player, especially one in a position like a defender where there's kind of positional advantage, shop it around in the back channels with the rest of the community that you're in, the league that you're in, because one of the people who came to me with that feedback was like, well, I would have given you, I don't know, a couple of other players who were way more lucrative for that trade. So I didn't get as much as I potentially could have done by not socializing it to others. So that was the thing that I missed out on. I could have got more value than I did, and also probably got away from the grievances of the community by doing it that way.
I think you've definitely got a newfound respect just based on how that move went. So, I mean, we're talking about advice anyways. So do you have any other, lessons learned that you could probably share with new or old managers in the Fantrax game?
Yeah, I think you got to obviously read your own needs, but I typically play the long game and, looking sort of 3, 4, 5 weeks out as to who's going to serve me. Now, if you're just in the thrash of, injured players and everything, I can understand why you go for immediacy. But I had the fortune, I think I was leading by about 3 weeks. And so I was able to take a chance on picking up, say, Ivan Toney a month before he came back and just sit him in my roster, because I knew I didn't need to have that depth elsewhere, knowing that Tony had the potential of doing good things once he was back. So I guess the advice there would be kind of plot out for where there's future gain, either because of fixtures or because of returning players from injury or whatever else. And Christopher Nkunku was a great example of that, where everyone was expecting him to be somewhat explosive at Chelsea. And, I kind of got him back 3-4 weeks prior to his return date on injury. Yeah. But, who knows what he'll deliver this year. But those are the types of players or the tactics I would employ to give you that long-term depth.
Okay, awesome. Any final points you want to mention?
No, I mean, thank you and no thank you for getting me into this game, I guess. I love the community. It's been fun. I'm learning along the way, and I know this season ahead is going to be a tough one with this sort of, being promoted up into that Premier League. So we'll see. I just want to hold my own, kind of like Forest. If I can just bounce around mid-table, I'll be quite happy.
Awesome. All right, listeners, that's all we had planned for this episode. Thanks again for tuning in to yet another Inside Trax series episode. I believe we have Everton up next, but stay tuned. Doesn't matter which club. You're going to love the content regardless. Ross, thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to seeing how you perform in a tougher league this season, but definitely my expectations are for you to get another title.
Wow, thank you. That's high expectation, but we'll see. We'll see. Thanks a lot.
All right, listeners, we'll catch you on the next episode then. Peace.